Hello and welcome to another monthly review video. This is for June of 2020. I've got a couple of books to go through and one movie to review as well, so let's get right to it. All right, the first book, and just to be clear, the background is different. There is a video for my free code session that's probably going to be published in mid-August. It's going to explain why the new view and why the camera is a little, it's not the widescreen-ish thing and all that other stuff. So that's all going to be coming in mid-August. So I'll leave it to then. But let's get to the first review. This is for, if I get it right, Sea of Rust by C. Robert Cargill. I think that's the name. So this is basically a premise of robots have literally eliminated all of humanity. And there are no more humans left. And so the book kind of goes back and forth for a little while between how things happened in terms of the apocalypse, so to speak, and where things are right now, which you would think that if AI and robots have taken over and that's all that's left in the world, wouldn't there be just a whole new intelligence that can evolve on its own, so to speak? But from the robot's perspective, all is not well, because there are these huge AI not machines per se, but computers that span tens, if not hundreds of stories in a building. And while they're massively intelligent, they can't move. And so they're trying to unite all the AIs under one AI to think the same. Almost feels kind of Borgish in a way. And of course, there are robots that fight this because they feel like they should be autonomous and they should be unique and not succumb to something like this. So it's an interesting book. I liked it. There's some spots that I felt were a little, I don't know, immature is not the right word, but something just, it felt like it needed a little bit more polish. But I did like how it kind of goes back and forth between the two, and also that the robots they don't speak or communicate in a odd sort of way. They're very human, which would be interesting to see if this ever goes somewhere else in like a sequel type of novel, and do the robots and does their intelligence kind of evolve on its own and gets away from that. That remains to be seen. So we'll see. But it's an interesting read, and I'd recommend if you're looking for a fun sci-fi kind of romp and you're into robots and AI. It's not the best I've ever read, but it does the job. It's good. All right, the next book. This is One Last Gasp by Andrew C. Piazza, I think is how you say the last name. And this is set in the end of World War II, where the Allied forces are, basically coming into all the German forces and knocking them down and finally getting near to the end of the war. And there's one group that infiltrates a certain area where the SS troops they almost seem either superhuman or insane and or both. And the more they investigate this one, like a castle or this large building, they start finding out some very awful, strange, bizarre things going on. So it kind of feels a little Lovecraftian in a way. If you've ever read H.P. Lovecraft, it kind of has that feeling. It's one that I bought in part because my older son, who's very much into World War I, World War II, history of guns and tanks and everything that goes on back then, I thought maybe he'd be interested in something like this, and he really liked it. I felt it was okay. It definitely, the history behind the names of the weapons and the tanks and all that stuff, I don't have that background. I don't have that knowledge, so I can't tell you if that's right or not. my older son thinks it is, so good on that. It was somewhat interesting. It definitely was one that kept my attention long enough to finish the whole book. But again, kind of like with the Sea of Rust, in some ways it felt like it needed some more polish, some more editing, and trim it down a little bit. It's interesting because the book looks like it was not independently published, but maybe published through a smaller publishing house, and the way it was printed. I don't know if it actually received a lot of edits, though there's some books that I've read, one in particular, right before we stopped reading to our kids, because they just got too old and they didn't want to read with the parents at night anymore. But there was a set of books that I was going to start reading with my older son, and they were sci-fi books, and man, you could tell the first one was just, you need an editor. You really need a good editor to challenge you a lot on what you're writing. And I felt like that book was suffering from that. This one, not so much. I think it was written fairly well, but there were definitely some times where I felt like it could have needed some trimming of the fat, so to speak, and make it a little bit more leaner and meaner. So, but it's a decent story. Again, it's kind of like the Sea of Rust. If you're looking for a quick read, a fun read over the summer, and you like, historical fiction mixed in with some horror, this is a decent book that falls into that. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is review one movie that I watched in June, and this is Ford v Ferrari. And this stars Matt Damon and Christian Bale. And it's based on the true story of what's his name? I'm forgetting it. I will remember. It's not Cobra. This is bugging me. I should look this up. Yes. Okay, I did look it up. Shelby. That's where I was forgetting it. Shelby. And he's basically been building his own muscle fast cars. He won Le Mans, but because of a heart condition, he's retired. But Ford wants to stick it to Ferrari and finally beat them. And so the whole movie is basically this: how does Ford build cars that can survive 24 hours and actually beat the Ferrari cars? This was highly entertaining. It was funnier than I expected. I think that's the thing that kind of surprised me. I was laughing a lot at this movie, and it always seemed to have this kind of lighthearted charm. It was, there's points of drama. There's definitely things going on from that perspective, but I never felt like it ever got too weighed down by that drama. It always felt like there was some kind, for lack of a better term, there was some kind of positive spin on this. And, there's a scene where Shelby and the character that Christian Bale plays, well, they end up fighting. And in the trailer, I didn't know where that was going to go. When you watch the movie, this is a little bit of a spoiler alert, which I think in the next movie or in the next video, I'm going to start putting up spoiler alerts because I want to get into depth with more of the things that I'm reviewing, but I don't want to ruin it for people. So there's the actual scene in the movies. They do fight, but it's pretty ridiculous why they're fighting, and it's more comedy than anything else. So it's definitely got tension and action, and the race scenes are amazing. They're done really, really well. Apparently, there's very little CGI in the movie. A lot of it was done in camera, which shocked me. I'm surprised that they were able to do that because you minimize the risk if you're doing it all digitally. But that's apparently what I read. But in any event, it's a great story. It's a great movie. Highly recommend it. It's acted very well, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Really good movie. All right, the next one is a book, The Chalk Man by C.J. Tudor. And this is a book that kind of has that feel, I hate the stereotype with Stephen King, but it's the trope of 12, 14-year-old kids or whatever that they're all in this one group and they're kind of sort of misfits in a way, but they start finding out these things about chalk drawings and especially about Chalkman, and some bad things start happening to people in the town, but not a lot. I really enjoyed this book. I've actually ended up buying more of her books because of this one. And my wife has read, I think, another one of hers along with this one as well, and she really liked both of them. I think it was written really, really well. It was engaging. It was hard to put down. Again, that's a quality that I find in books that I recommend. It's if it's one that I really don't ever want to put down and I want to keep reading and reading, that's a sign that I'm probably going to give it a thumbs up. And this falls into that category. It's similar in some ways with Sea of Rust in that it goes back in time to when these kids were younger, and then it jumps to the present day and age with one main character, and it's from his perspective and how he writes it. It's good. I really recommend it. And again, this is going to be another spoiler in a way, but the reason why I enjoy it so much is because it didn't end up where I thought it might go. It for some reason it had this feeling of there's going to be this supernatural explanation to it, and that's fine, but that's something I just personally don't believe in. And it's okay to suspend disbelief and read a story if it's written well and it brings in some kind of supernatural aspect to it. Though I've always struggled with that because any horror movies that bring in ghosts or demons or poltergeists or whatever, they always just seem like they're limited in a way up until the movie progresses and it gets worse and worse. Why do these entities, if they're so powerful, why do they screw around like that? It makes no sense to me. It's like if they have the ability to really mess with you, why wouldn't they do that right away? So this book, it surprised me in that it doesn't go that way. It actually seems to have a kind of a rational or at least natural explanation for what's going on. And I like that. And I also enjoyed just how things got interwoven in unexpected ways and how the story progressed. So like the book. Hopefully I'll like more of what the author wrote, and maybe I'll end up reviewing more of her books in the future. Next one is this one, The Salt Line, from Holly Goddard Jones. And this is set in a futuristic setting where apparently I think they're called minor ticks. And these are some ticks that, I don't know where or how they come from, but the females, I believe, can actually mine into your skin and lay a bunch of eggs. And if you don't get that tick out in a minute, it can spread, and then the eggs will come out of you in nasty ways. It can also cause some kind of disease that will end up killing you. So they have these things, and let me look up quick. I forget what they're called, but it's this device that you can put into yourself or on your skin. As soon as you feel the itching, you have to do this one thing. And hold on, I will find it because I talk about it all the time, but I forget because I read these books and then I stamp. They call it stamping, or these stamps. I guess they look like cigars, and if you feel an itch, you got to put it on right now. And it basically is this hook or something that pulls the tick out, and that hurts, but it's better than having that actually lay all of its eggs and potentially causing death. So there's no physical like salt line per se that they lay down salt, but there are now these kind of zones or territories where people have been able to, I don't know how, but they've wiped out the ticks to that point. And this line is actually some kind of fence that emits a frequency that deters the ticks from getting too close to it. So the point of this book is that there's actually there's services now where people can go out into the area beyond the salt line and go out and camp there, and they have to wear these kind of specialized suits and get trained and make sure that they all have to actually stamp themselves, even though they're not bit, so they know what it takes to do it. And they go across and go to see these areas that were in America that are not protected anymore. And some bad things happen. Now, this isn't a horror story per se. There's definitely a couple. There's one kind of squeamish part near the end, but it wasn't that bad. But it's more about what's actually happening out there and what's really going on with some communities that have actually been able to survive out in these areas. Um, I'd say the first third of the book I liked. Overall, the writing is done well, but for some reason, as the book progressed, especially near the end, I kind of was reading to finish it. It didn't really, it wasn't bad. And again, it's one of those books that I wouldn't not recommend, but it kind of felt like it was starting to stumble near the end, and I didn't quite get or um, really get a good pulse for where all this was going. And I don't know, it's okay. It's again, the author, the writing itself is good, but it did hold me. But as I was starting to get near the end of the book, and take that for what it's worth. The best for last, so to speak. This is Rise from Mira Grant. And this is apparently a set of short stories and novels that were written in, I think they're called the Rising or a News Flesh collection or something like, I don't know. But there's a trilogy of books that she's written, which actually I've purchased now, and it's on my stack next on my nightstand next to my bed. So I'll be reading that hopefully within another month or two, depending upon how fast I get through the other books on top of it. But I read this probably in the wrong way, in that the sense I should have read the stories first and the trilogy first and then read these books, because they kind of complement characters that you meet in and discover in the trilogy of books. That said, I love this. I find her style of writing really one that's engaging. I read her Alien Echo book, which I also reviewed. I don't remember when earlier this year, but that was a book I really enjoyed, and this one is as well. What I found really interesting is that in a couple of the stories, it's set up such that you know how it's going to end in a general sense. There's no surprise there. Like, they talk about one of the first outbreaks, which happened at San Diego Comic-Con in 2014 or something like that. And they basically say how this was like one of the first attacks, and it was a disaster. Nobody made it out. So it's like, that nobody gets out alive. But they go back and talk about how they discover and invest, because apparently now they're far enough in the future where they've been able to handle this and start making headway and to get a normalization of society, because this rising is basically zombies, for lack of a better term. But based on genetic research from two different places, and these viruses or whatever combine in the wild and cause this to happen. So in San Diego Comic-Con, they talk about how they've been able to piece together information from calls that were done out from the convention and other things like that. And it's again, where this is headed, but still it's riveting. It's and there's another story in there too that's kind of done the same way, in that how it ends, but the way the story's written, it kept my attention a lot. So I'm looking forward to reading the actual trilogy of books, and I like her writing style. I really enjoyed reading these. It's a I don't know if you saw it, but it's a pretty thick book, and yet I think I ripped through it pretty fast, because it was pretty easy to go through and read, and I wanted to keep reading it and have that quality, that aspect of not letting me go. So definitely recommend that book, and we'll see what the trilogy is like. I'm hoping that it's very similar and very engaging. So that is all I have for this month. I already have over there behind the computer a couple of books already stacked up that I've been reading for July. So there will be some material there. I'll be trying to make sure I get a movie in as well, or movie or two in as well. But other than that, that's all I got for June. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next month.